The Red Death had long devastated the country. No Brazilians had ever been so fatal or so hideous. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution, the scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless. When his people were dying, he summoned to his presence 1,000 happy friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of a hidden palace. The external world would take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. There were gestures, ballet dancers, musicians, beauty. There was wine and security at the masquerade ball. There was no Red Death. In this apartment, there stood a gigantic clock. Its pendulum swung to and fro, and when the hour was to be stricken, the clock made a sound, which was loud and deep, and it was observed that the happiest people grew pale from hearing it. But, in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. This continued until the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then, the music ceased, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy conclusion of all things as before. But now, there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock. And thus, it happened that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, the crowd became aware of the presence of a masked figure, which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive of disapproval and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. There are chords in the heart of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor morals existed. The figure was tall and thin, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask, which concealed the visage, was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheek. And yet, all of this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the murmur had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stuck to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be confused. In the first moment, with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next, his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know who we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." Prince Prospero's words rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers and approached. Within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, there was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which, instantly afterwards, fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and, seizing the murmur, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unattainable horror at finding the grave circumstance and corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent a rudeness, unattained by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. The life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death had inimitable domination over all.